Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today, and I'm here with Yamaha's Tracer 9 GT, the 2022 model, or 2021 model when it was updated. Now this is a very cool machine. What they've done is basically pulled out the stops, particularly here in Australia where we only get the GT, and the GT is the top spec model with the electronic suspension. It's got a full electronics loadout. It comes with the panniers as well. The electronic suspension is KYB, and obviously this is designed as a premium sports touring machine, which is gonna do pretty much everything you could want, 1-up or 2-up. And now I did most of my testing on this bike 2-up. We did a trip out to Dubbo, and I will say the Tracer 9 GT handled the wet conditions until we got a bit further inland very, very well, particularly 2-up, which I thought was really kind of a reflection of just how refined they've made this machine. And certainly when we're talking about a premium sports tourer, this is ticking all the boxes for me. Now, I've mentioned the suspension. This gets the new larger CP3 engine, so the 889cc, I believe it is, and that has refined the engine somewhat. And it's a little bit different in the Tracer 9 GT than it was in the MT09. However, a lot of the refinements carry across between those two models. You're getting dual TFT displays on the front, which is a nice touch. You do have a lot of electronics, so the switch blocks are quite busy. 4-piston calipers on the front, the 41mm forks, nice tall adjustable screen. That's a manually adjustable screen. Very, very simple. You just do that, can do it on the move, couldn't be simpler. Quite a low seat height, 810 to 825 millimeters, which is very much, very accessible for most riders, particularly at the 810 end of things. And it's relatively narrow for a touring machine. You've got these great panniers on the back, one on each side, quite a lot of storage from those. They have a very easy to use locking mechanism as well, which means that you can take them off the bike and put stuff in them quite easily. The only downside is, of course, they open from the side, so you do need to be a little bit careful as to how you fill them, but by no means is that a big issue, for me at least. They also did seem waterproof. Full LED lighting all around. I love the styling of this bike, it looks really cool. Great wind protection. The handguards also offer some great protection there. Heated grips as a quality of life feature, and an up and down quick shifter. So I'll start off with the handling of the Tracer 9 GT. Now, having electronic suspension gives it quite a different feel, I will say, and this is something that I've always noticed in all of the electronic suspension systems that I have tested, and it takes time to get used to that because it's almost like there's a little bit of a disconnect between the rider and what's going on with the suspension, and I think that's just simply because where a traditional system is quite linear and it's very predictable, the electronic systems, because they are adaptive and they are working really for the conditions, there's just not quite the same level of predictability as far as how the bike's going to behave. However, with that said, the KYB semi-active electronic suspension on this bike made it incredibly planted, and the comfort was very, very good. It swallowed up the big potholes, everything like that, exceptionally well, kept the bike very much glued to the ground. It certainly did offer some good feedback. It's just different feedback than what I'm used to because I don't normally ride a bike with the electronic suspension. It is a fully adjustable suspension system, and there is adjustability on the tops of the forks there for the adjustability. Same on the rear. I found personally that the system was really, really good. I did wind up the preload quite a bit for someone on the back. I will say I feel like the bike is a little bit more rear end orientated as far as that weight balance between the front and the rear. It does have some battle axe tires on the bike, and I think it's got a very round profile. I just didn't find myself carrying much lean angle through the corners. I think probably the most lean angle I was carrying was through roundabouts and things like that where I was getting a toe down. But generally speaking, through the corners, just the way the bike handles, because it is very, very agile, both at low speeds and at higher speeds, I didn't need to carry that much lean angle into a lot of the corners. And in fact, because the forks were so well supported by that electronic system, I wasn't getting that much dive in the forks. So really setting up the bike into the corners hard on the brakes wasn't really working the way I'm used to on a more traditional suspension system. But I didn't really need to do that. I could just ride hard straight into the corner and just kind of peel through. It doesn't hold an arc in quite the same way, again, as a traditional system. However, through the corners, it was exceptional, realistically speaking, right up to some quite high speeds once we got out onto the open roads. And in the wet, it was exceptional as well. Very, very planted, quite confidence inspiring despite that different feel to it. The wide bars give you a lot of leverage, and because the bike is so responsive, it does mean that you definitely want to keep a pretty light grip on those bars so as not to be putting inputs in, because it is so responsive, it will really change the line with just the tiniest of inputs on the bars. Now within that electronic suspension systems, there's two settings. There's suspension 1, suspension 2. 1 is the sportier mode, 2 is the more comfort driven mode. I put it in sport mode, loved it, thought that was really good. Put it in the comfort mode and really I didn't see any improvement even out on the open roads. So in the end, I just left it in sport mode 1. I was very happy with that. And as I said, all I did was add preload for someone on the back, which certainly helped as far as the sag on the rear, reducing that a little bit, and it was really, really good. Now, while the electronic suspension may be the fancy kind of feature that we're seeing on the Tracer 9 GT, the heart of this bike, the CP3 Triple, is very much the gem which helps it shine so much. Now, as I said, it's been heavily refined with that 889cc version of the Triple, and that has added a lot more refinement. The very early MT09 was quite a harsh and at times difficult to control engine. They have refined it enormously with this latest iteration, and certainly with the electronics available as well, where you've got 4 D modes or ride modes, that further changes the engine characteristic. Now in D mode 4, which is the lowest power, this bike could almost be a learner legal or lambs legal bike. It has a very gentle throttle opening, very linear power. You really even using the throttle quite aggressively. It's almost stodgy. It's perfect for the super slippery conditions, and it almost felt like really I didn't really find that it got to the point where it was really kicking on. Knock it up to D mode 3, and that's where you start to feel that performance come back on, but still, I would say, quite a gentle ride mode, good for, again, the slippery conditions and the wet conditions. However, where you want a little bit more power on demand. The growl from this engine is absolutely beautiful. It's mainly intake growl, it's not so much exhaust note. Really, really beautiful, very, very intoxicating, really gives the bike a beautiful soundtrack and a lot of character. Knock it up into modes 1 or 2 and you do get a much more instant throttle response. There is quite a bit of free play in that throttle, I will admit, and one of my only criticisms probably in that regard was that I did find that I would open the throttle and then I'd have to kind of adjust my hand to open it further. It probably could do with a smaller throttle throw. But again, because this is quite an aggressive bike, I can see why they haven't done that. And in modes 1 and 2, when I was shifting my hand to then open the throttle a bit further at times, if you let the throttle off a little bit, the bike could hit the engine braking and that was a little bit less smooth. The slipper clutch, when aggressively downshifting, very, very good. The engine braking itself, very, very good. The power delivery, when you're really having a go, is exceptional, whether that was overtaking or just having some fun on an open road, particularly in modes 1 and 2. I ended up just leaving it in mode 2. I thought that was the perfect compromise for me. And it's quite a free revving engine. It doesn't have a super heavy flywheel effect in it, but very nicely balanced, I would say, overall. And when it does come time to smash open that throttle and have a go, it is incredibly willing. And it's, I guess in the lower part of the rev range, it's quite linear, so, you know, quite controllable, unlike the very early MT09. Very easy thing to ride. In modes 1 and 2, I did have to use a bit of a throttle taking off, where in modes 3 and 4, I found that just that softer throttle opening made it a little bit easier and I wasn't having to do that. And then as you run through the rev range, if you're just riding normally, that's got quite a tall rev range. If you're riding hard and you're really smashing that throttle open, it revs up very, very quickly and it'll be ready for the shifts. It has a quick shifter, up and down quick shifter on it. The up shifts, really, really good. The downshifts, most of the time it just didn't seem to want to work. And I felt like, oh, I figured it out, you know, I'll give it a little bit of throttle on the downshift. Sometimes that'd work, sometimes it wouldn't. I just could not figure out why the downshifter, in very similar situations, sometimes it'd work well. I'd knock it down a couple of gears, perfect. Other times I'd be higher in the rev range or whatever, and it just wouldn't do it. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Upshifts really good. Downshifts, not so much. Pretty unreliable. I really only ended up using it for the upshifts. Other than that, nice tall gears, very, very solid gearbox, great engagement, easy to use, and I did find myself normally just running it in, say, 5th gear. In modes 3 and 4, which are the much more restrained, I was using 6th gear to sit at 120 or so when I was cruising along. However, once I got onto the open roads and was having a bit more fun, I mainly left it in 5th for that little bit snappier response and being a bit more in the power band, I guess you would say. Also accompanying the triple cylinder engine, it has got quite an extensive electronics package. We've got traction control, we've got lift control, we've got brake control, we've got cruise control. Really love the cruise control. There are heated grips. There's quite a lot of settings here, and of course the electronic suspension, which is part of the electronics package. So a lot going on here as far as the electronics, but to be honest, I just left it in, I think it was traction control level 1 and the default brake control setting, and I never needed to change it. I didn't have any ABS intervention in any of the time I was riding, despite it being very, very slippery. Like, a lot of the riding was in pouring rain, in fairly slippery conditions at fairly high speed. So kind of the normal 80 to 110, 120 kind of speeds. So as far as that, I found the electronics system really exceptional. And again, that also comes back to the grip from those tires, which was good enough that I wasn't needing the traction control or the ABS. It was only those road snakes, which were a bit of a blow to my confidence because the bike really moved around on those. One point which was definitely worth talking about was the brake setup on this bike. It actually looks like the same Advix 4-pot calipers from the MT-09 and the R7. However, on this bike, there's a more solid feeling of bite on them and the power is really good. So perhaps that's the different pads or the Nissan master cylinder coming into play. I will say the braking performance on the front of this bike was very good. The only thing that stopped me taking better advantage of that was the electronic suspension, as there was so little dive on the forks, even hard onto those brakes. It meant that I couldn't do the more traditional technique of braking into the corner to compress the forks and roll in. So the fact the suspension was so stable and so solid kind of took away from the ability of the brakes to shine more. Although maybe a little less preload manually set here would help on the front end. So overall exceptional at the front end, never needing the ABS. The rear end, not a lot of feel or bite, but a little bit of power there. Good for low speed control where you could ride the rear brake pretty heavily without worrying about upsetting the bike. Less need to drag the rear through corners to stabilize the bike, however, as the suspension did such a good job, but okay for slight speed corrections mid-corner. So let's have a quick talk about rider ergonomics of the Tracer 9 GT, mainly because I'll be doing a separate video doing this a little bit more in depth, but I do want to talk about it. So I'm a 180 centimeter rider, 32-inch inseam, I guess fairly average, about 70 kilos, and I can get both feet down flat to the ground exceptionally easy. No issues there at all. I was actually very surprised by how easy the Tracer 9 GT is to get onto, because a lot of the sports touring bikes feel quite tall. The 810 to 825 millimeter seat height with the adjustability in that does make it a very easy thing to jump onto, which is great to see. So if you're a shorter rider, perhaps this will be a bike that you want to look at. It's got quite a big tank, but it's got a nice sculpted tank as well, so it's very easy to get my knee in under the tank. And again, for someone with longer legs, there's quite a bit more room for them to get in there. The seat to peg ratio, pretty good for a sports touring bike, perhaps less so for a touring bike. I did 2 to 3 hours in the saddle, no problems at all. 2 was probably the sweet spot. At 3, I was starting to get a bit of a sore bum. The seats are comfortable, so in that regard, very, very good. And I don't doubt that I could do probably an 8 or 9 hour day on this bike with reasonable stops. It is good to get off and stretch your legs. As you can see here, reach to the bars keeps me very, very upright. I've got a really good amount of wind protection there, easy view of the dash, plenty of view through those mirrors, and good protection from the handguards, and front brake is adjustable. You may want to upgrade at least the clutch lever if you want something with a different throw to the lever. The switch blocks themselves are very, very busy. You got your starter and a menu toggle here on the right switch block. On the left switch block is where it gets quite busy. There's actually a mode button in the flasher location, and what that lets you do is it allows you to toggle through which of the settings you want to change with the separate toggle switch. Now that does make it, once you figured it out, quite easy to go through the different settings, which is the D mode, the suspension settings, and the traction control settings. The rest of the settings on the dash, like the heated grips, are done via the menu button, which you roll that up and down, pick what you want, click it in, and then you can change those settings. And that does include like your trip meter and the simple stuff like that. Apart from that, you do have your cruise control, which is a switch in the center, and then a set button down the bottom, and then up and down basically just changes that speed for you 2 kilometers at a time. Overall, with a pillion on the back, I really basically didn't notice I had a pillion on the back at all, which is ideally, I think, what you want. Was really appreciative of the grips as well on the back there. And she did mention she wouldn't have minded a top box she could lean back against, but I think these days they do not recommend you do that. The weight capacity for the top boxes is fairly low. So certainly if you're not the tallest rider, I would definitely check out the Tracer 9 GT, because it really does feel like they've got this set up very, very well for the shorter riders, and jumping on is quite easy, reach to the ground is easy. 220 kilos, so it is a fairly heavy bike, and it does feel like a solid machine. Okay, so what else is there to talk about? Full LED lighting, cornering lights on this as well. I really didn't notice them working at all. However, they are there, and I guess they do the job, because I was very happy with the throw of light from the headlight, and we had very dark, cloudy, wet conditions. So as far as that, nice to see, of course, the LED lighting all around, because it is very, very bright. It does make it very visible, the bike very visible for other road users. Love the adjustable screen. The fact that it's manual, no problems at all for me. Very, very visible dashes. I really like those panniers. They come off very easily. They've got really simple systems. I did find the lower kind of locking mechanism there, where the bag can actually move around quite a lot. However, it's obviously there for at the higher speeds to make sure that the bike doesn't move around enough that it could damage that top locking mechanism. Quite a simple mechanism, easy to get on and off the bike, waterproof, easy to open, leaving them on the bike. It just uses the bike key. Overall, a really elegant solution. I've been very, very impressed with the Tracer 9 GT, and much like on the FJR 1300 when we tested that and my wife and I did some 2-up riding, I got the big thumbs up from my wife saying I really liked riding as a pillion on this bike. I really liked doing the trip away. It was enjoyable, it was fun, the bike was really good, the comfort was really good. And basically that means that if you're looking to do that kind of trip and you need your significant other on board and you're looking for a good machine to do that on, I think this is going to tick all the boxes, which is certainly going to make it an easier sell when it comes to purchasing a bike like this. Anyway, that is my thoughts on the Tracer 9 GT. If you've got any questions at all, feel free to ask them down below in the comments. I would do my best to answer them. As always, stay safe out there. Thanks for watching, and you can support the channel on Patreon.